Welcome and thank you for tuning in to the Visit the Northeast of Scotland podcast with me, your host, Jacqueline Vandenacker. In today's episode, we're speaking with James Wight from Sup to Summit based in Montrose. James started his business about 4.5 years ago when, after spending many years working for others in outdoor adventure sports, he wanted to return home. The path to getting his business established was not a smooth one, but ultimately he was successful in creating an outdoor centre for stand-up paddleboarding and exciting adventures both on the coast and in other areas of Scotland. The Sup to Summit team have developed unique opportunities to travel, exploring the great lochs and glens of Scotland while on a board. If you love getting onto the water and seeing wildlife, exploring the coastline, or even a scenic sunset paddle, then you must visit Aberdeenshire. Welcome to Grampian Escapes podcast, Visit the Northeast of Scotland. I'm really excited to have you with us today, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about Sup to Summit and the business that you've set up here.
Good morning.
So, good morning. Can you give us an introduction to you and your business, Sup to Summit?
So I'm James, or Jim, or I go by many a name. And so I started up Sup to Summit 4 years ago. 2018 was the first year we launched, and it came about from being an outdoor instructor. I started in the industry in 2000, and then 2003-04 I started instructing, and I worked a very long time working for other people in the outdoor industry across the world, so down in England, France, Turkey, Dominican, those sort of places. After a very long time of working for other people, I was a little bit upset, so to speak, about the difference in the wages and prices of what people were charged. So some people, for example, would be charged £150 to go and do a couple of days' activities, and they would take 8 to 10 people at a time, and then the instructor would be paid £75 per day, for example. And for me, that needed to change. I wasn't happy with the fact that I think if you're doing a good job, you should be paid well, not the person sitting at the top of the CEO office, so to speak. So 2016 was the last year that I worked full-time for anybody. And the run-up to 2016, I found myself living inside the M25 in London, homeless, running a £3 million complex, and I was paid £22,500 a year to manage this huge organisation, and I couldn't afford to live anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I ended up homeless, kind of living in the back of my car, staying on friends' sofas, going down and staying at my brother's house. And for me at that point, I couldn't work out how to get anywhere better than where I'd been at that point. So I decided that the only way to change it was for me to then do something for myself.
Yeah.
And at first, I kind of sat there and went, well, I love stand-up paddleboarding, I love climbing. And I kind of just went Sup to Summit. I said, oh, that's quite good, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll see if I can make that. So I immediately made all the social media pages, bought the website domain name, and then sort of sat on it and didn't really know what else to do at that point. And then about 6 months later after this, I decided that I was going to try and do something more with it, but again I still didn't quite know what it was going to be at that point. So I decided the next step was to make a logo, and so I then made the logo, and I found a little app on the App Store that you could create a logo design. From there I found the mountain, changed the word into Sup to Summit, and it forced me to do a tagline.
Yes.
And at that point I was like, well, off the top of my head, affordability and adventure, I'll put that in. So that was the start of it. I came home June 2016, I had enough of London, basically.
So is home the northeast?
Yes, I'm from Montrose originally. Kind of grew up around Angus, South Aberdeenshire area. At 20 I left and went off travelling and working around the world and all these lovely, fantastic places. Having a great time, and at that point it didn't really matter as there was no responsibilities or anything like that. Whereas when my first child was born, Ava, when she was born, kind of everything then changed. So I worked my way up the career path, going from instructor to senior instructor to chief instructor to centre manager. Yeah, so the home was the northeast. Yeah, like I said, it's having children and everything, that changed kind of my mentality massively. So I came home, and if I'm honest, I was done with the outdoors at that point. I was sick of not getting paid any money. I was sick of working long hours and working weekends, because there's a lot of working weekends.
Yes.
That's predominantly when most people are off work, so weekends are your busy time.
Yeah.
And I came home and I worked in a walled garden working in the walled garden for about, 4 or 5 months. And to start with, I was like, this is fantastic. I'm outside. I don't work weekends. I don't have to mind my P's and Q's in front of children, and I can relax a little bit. And then the winter came in, and I suddenly realised that I was like, I don't want to work in a garden anymore. This is cold and I'm not moving enough. And then now and so I started looking for work, and I applied to the lochs ski centre in 2016. The lochs ski centre to be just a lift operator. And I was phoned back up a couple of days later, and they said, oh, look, you've got obviously a lot of outdoor qualifications. You're first aid qualified, you can ski, and you've also got ropes qualifications. Would you be happy rescuing people off a chairlift? And I was like, yeah. And then they came back, so they offered me the head of ski patrol job for the lochs. So I did that for 3-ish years. Yeah, loved that. Saw a lot of broken bones. It was always fun and interesting. I never felt really out of my depth.
Yeah. Well, it's a very challenging thing to try and coordinate, I'm imagining.
Well, it's more realistically, and what people don't realise is the ski patrollers, their main job is just to get you off the hill, keep you warm and make sure you don't get any worse. Yeah, and then the ambulance turn up and then they take over. And thankfully we only had to use them a couple of times. So from there, I then came to 2017, still very much with Up to Summit burning in the back of my head. I decided I was going to try and revert back to what I know, sort of outdoor education. That's what I'd predominantly been in when I was working away. So working with children in the outdoors, doing adventurous activities and looking at the growth mindset and the learning capabilities of what the outdoors can offer in regards to what mainstream children get in regards to classroom. So looked at that and I thought, right, this is what we're going to do. And again, it's quite hard to get into. There's a lot of licenses you need to work with children, especially in adventurous places. So that to me wasn't massively achievable. And in 2017 over the summer, I was realising that whatever this was going to be Up to Summit, I'm going to need equipment. So I need to start going off and working again. So I started freelancing. I went back to freelancing, and so you earn slightly better wage, but you normally have to travel a lot further for it. And I went from Aberdeenshire down to Dartmoor, to Kent, to South Wales, to North Wales, to the Peak District, just travelling around, working for different companies, doing sort of 4 days here, 5 days there, filling gaps in between with a couple of days of little smaller jobs. Saved up a lot of money to then start Up to Summit. And then through doing that job, I landed a gig down in Pembrokeshire, down in South Wales, working for a kayaking company, doing kayak tours around Fishguard Harbour, sorry. That was the eye-opener, because their model was very similar to my model now. Okay. And I kind of looked at them going, I can see what you're doing. Yeah. Do exactly what I do, kind of turn up in a van, unload all the equipment, people have already booked, they turn up, we take them out for a lovely activity, bring them back in, everyone's had a good time. And I thought, I can do this, but no one's doing this up here. At this point, there was nobody. Yeah. And this is 2017. The closest thing we had at that time was Campbell up at Scott Surf in Aberdeen, who was doing surfing lessons, but, and there was nobody else around sort of doing that. So I now had the business plan in my head. I had the selling points, the USPs, and now it was time to then turn this into kind of Up to Summit as it is now. And
create a business.
Yeah, so it was the 2018 April we launched. We started over in Forth Loch and we were sort of running pacer lessons there. And I was, at that point, I was very much, it was on a shoestring budget. I was borrowing vans off of friends and just throwing all the equipment into the back of the van.
Making it work somehow.
And just making it work, and then making sure that the actual product, regardless of how we got there and how everything got set up, but what we delivered was fantastic. Yeah. And that was the main thing, like slowly over the time we sort of built up, started to run lessons on Montrose Basin. So we started our sunset lessons there. And that was really what kick-started the business. We've obviously grown up in Montrose. I knew that it always gets a really great sunset. So I thought, well, how about we do a sunset lesson? And the first one we ran, we got a fantastic evening. It was a beautiful sunset. And we went out, and that evening we posted all the pictures up online on social media pages. It must be like being a celebrity when they post something up that's really trending and interesting, because my phone didn't just go bing, bing, it was just bing, it just kept going, and it was just insane. And the response from that, and then that's what really started the business up, was getting those sunset lessons. And then from there I was kind of, because obviously Montrose Basin's very tidal, there's only really a 3-hour operational window that you've got on the basin. Desperately was kind of looking for somewhere else and looking up and down the coast, and I actually went up for a meal with my partner up to the Creel Inn, sat in the Creel Inn in Cataline, And I said to him, I'm just going to have a little wander down to the harbour and have a look.
Which is a great sheltered location.
Fantastic, and it was perfect. You know, like you could always access the water, had lots of shelter coming in from the headland and the cliffs. Immediately I thought, this is brilliant. So I've gone down there for a little paddle myself, and then advertised, must be around about the start of June. Went to go and run the first lesson, and it was on the day of my cousin's wedding. So I tried to sneak in a couple of lessons first thing in the morning, and then I'd go to the wedding in the afternoon and the rest of the evening. So I went down, ran the first lesson, went out for the second lesson, and we were sort of just paddling over by the island, which is called Foley Island, or nicknamed Seal Island, because there used to be a lot of seals there. And we're just paddling over to the island, and 5 dolphin go literally right beside us, and along the coast, travelling up north. And we were, obviously, all of us were ecstatic.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to take as many pictures as I can, but I'm so overwhelmed by seeing the dolphins as well that actually out of about 75 pictures, I think I got one that was half decent. Most of them
I was blurred.
Yeah, and I was just like, and I'm like watching myself go by, and it was just, it was, I missed a lot of good opportunities on that point. However, we came back in from that lesson, and my clients were obviously ecstatic, they're buzzing. So we saw dolphins to anyone that walked past, and it was obviously someone local. And they sort of, oh, that's fantastic, you saw dolphins. Have you been around to the next bay and seen the puffins and the caves? And my ears pricked up, and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. So obviously went to my cousin's wedding the rest of the day, and I travelled up to Catline again, jumped on my board, and went exploring, and found lots of just unbelievable scenery and coastline, with hundreds of puffins and seabirds of all different types, from kittywinks to herring gulls to puffins to guillemots.
Well, you're not far from Falsfuch there,
No,
are
not
you?
at
Which
all,
is
so it's
RSPB reserve.
Yeah, so it's probably maybe 3 kilometres shy. And the funny thing is, a lot of people who go up to Croton to go and to watch all the puffins and take pictures, and they've then come and done a lesson with us, and they paddled through the middle of the puffins.
Yeah.
And they're like, we've never been this close. This is amazing. Which is fantastic for us. That was one fantastic thing. I mean, and for me as an operator for running stuff on the coast, it's great to be able to do tours, but you need to be able to make sure that people are safe. And one thing that Catline was just fantastic for is that you were never really more than 10 to 15 metres going along the coast before there was another escape route that if it did turn on us, we could get people straight off the water and they're safe.
I did have a look at those paddleboarding sessions myself because I quite fancied them, but I've never been on a paddleboard. So the one thing I thought was wise to do is to actually come here to your pond. So we're actually standing in a converted shipping cabin, which is now part office and stores, and it's got all the equipment around us. So how did you get this location here with the pond for your introductory lessons?
So firstly, there's no stipulation that you have to come here first. You know, like we get asked this a lot. Everything is suitable to beginners. All the lessons that we offer are based around a full beginner lesson at the start. So whether you're at Catline, Montrose Basin, here, you'll always get that kind of beginner starter lesson regardless, unless you've been with us a few times and we recognise the face and actually you don't need to listen to that again.
Yeah.
But, but to get the pond, this is a massive headache. It feels like nothing now. But so last October, a friend of mine posted up a picture of him and his daughters sitting on a pedalo on this body of water. And I was like, where's that? Whereabouts is this bit of water? Because I know where most of the water is around here, and I don't recognise that. Like I said, it was a friend's farm. They'd built an irrigation dam, and it was freshly dug. So it hadn't been sat there for a long time, going stagnant, and and it was deep. It was 4 metres deep. It worked really well. So I immediately contacted my friend and went up there and had a look at the pond. He sort of asked what's my plans, what would I like to do with it, and sort of said I'd like to run lessons on here.
Yeah.
I think this could work really, really well for lessons. And he was like, yeah, go for it, see if it works, and then we'll talk afterwards. So that was the end of August. September, we launched the pond. We ran the pond up until the end of October. And what we found immediately was we had a completely new set of clientele. Everyone said the same thing. I've wanted to do this for the last 5 years. However, I don't want to go in the sea. And that was, to me, was an eye-opener because we'd been so busy. I never really realised that there was a whole group of people that wanted to do this, but they weren't willing to go out in the North Sea.
Well, that's exactly how I felt. So I thought having the chance to do it here and fall off in relative safety is a little more comforting.
It's silly, isn't it? Because when you say it out loud, it definitely completely and utterly makes sense. And because we've been so busy with all the other stuff, I never realised. Fast forward to November-y time, and sort of went to go to speak to my friend, the farmer, sat down with him, and sort of explained, right, I want to put in porta cabin, I want to put in a cafe, I want to have this running operationally like a big sort of outdoor activity centre. He completely, fair enough, was like, you can't do that, it's a working farm. So I came away from that going, okay, that's cool, well, maybe I need to find somewhere else. So I then spent November through to the end of January, 2 months, sitting on Google Maps, trying to find bodies of blue on the map, and then the following day I would drive out there and try and find something that was suitable. I couldn't find anywhere, I couldn't find anywhere. I was searching and searching and searching, and everything I was finding was just not suitable. Started panicking around about Christmas time because people were buying gift vouchers specifically for the price of the pond, and I think, actually, I haven't really got a pond now.
Yeah.
I need to find somewhere else. And then, must have been about the end of December, the Royal Arch, they posted up a picture of the site with their big pond. And I immediately went, oh, that could work. Mm-hmm. That could really work.
Especially because it's still under construction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's an opportunity to come in at ground level.
Massively. And the best thing about it was the pond had only just been dug that previous year, so it was really, really fresh, really clean still. Trying to manage water that's clean already is really easy to maintain and keep on top of. So I contacted them around about December. End of January we got a meeting, and it was go from there really. And we went from having nothing here to just building up. And at this point we're sitting on a shop and a kit store, and then we've got a cafe coming in and potentially some glamping pods and toilets and showers and changing rooms. And
okay.
Stuff like that. There's a lot coming into here. We're working in partnership with the Royal Arch. Yes, there's a lot going on. Hopefully 2022 will be even bigger and there'll be a lot more options. So we've got more activities coming in. We're going to have mountain bike hire. We're going to have axe throwing, bushcraft. Long term is to then build a climber wall here as well.
So it's going to be a full-on activity centre. Yeah, I'm sure a steep learning curve as well.
Oh, massively. This year's been huge.
Coming back to adventure, I mean, part of paddleboarding, particularly here on the coastline, is obviously that you get to see a lot of wildlife that you've mentioned before. But I understand you're going to be doing some longer trips over the next season as well, which are not necessarily on the coast, but more inland in Scotland.
Yeah, so 2020 we launched the Great Glen trips and Loch trips, which was on top of what we'd already done previous of our West Coast retreat. A weekend sort of holiday where we hire a cottage on the West Coast over just in between Oban and Glencoe on the banks of Loch Linnhe. We take 6 people at a time over there. We provide, it's on a half-board basis, so we have the cottage for them to sleep in, an evening meal and breakfast. And then during the day, lunch is up to them, but we take them paddling in some fantastic locations. And then from there, I'd always kind of had the drive to run Great Glen trips. I'd kind of started, that's kind of how I got into paddleboarding, was by doing a Great Glen challenge. Although I thoroughly hated the challenge itself, the love I got of paddleboarding with all my equipment and expeditioning and just pulling up wherever I wanted and setting up camp and camping there for the evening and then packing everything down, jumping back on the board and carrying on. I thought that was just amazing.
There's something different about continuing your journey instead of coming back to the same place every time.
And I thought, well, you know what? If this is getting so big now, I think I can go for this and run a Great Glen trip. So I thought, I'm going to do 2 trips and I'm going to advertise them. I've never had a response like this. This one was huge. Posted up about the Great Glen trip. This is what we're going to do. It's 4 nights paddling across the Great Glen, and it just went berserk. We sold out in 3 hours for the 2 trips. We had so much interest, we put on another one that evening that sold out an hour and a half later. We had people phoning us from Hawaii, contacting us from Spain and France. So we started off with 2 trips. By the end of the evening, we did 3, and then by the end of December, we had 9 trips all fully booked.
That's a huge demand for an activity.
Massive. The demand was massive. And then it was a case of then working out how it was going to work. And that was really, really the sort of, the fun part was, okay, I've done this now. Now I've got to make this work.
What do I do now?
Exactly. So we'd already decided in our head is to hammock and tarp with an airbed inside the hammock. Just the best way.
I have seen images on your social media and it just looks mind-boggling how everything's linked together.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I would say 95% of our clients that did the Great Glen trip really, really nervous about the hammock, and most people came away from the trip, contacted us asking us if they could buy it because they were so impressed with how good the kit was. So the first thing was to buy all of that, and then from there, working out how we're going to cook for people, how we're going to transport all the kit. And then it was just working out, logistically wise and how we're going to move people around How do we cater for dietary requirements? How do we keep food cold? All of these sort of things that you've got to think about on these trips. You could put all the planning you want, and we bought a big box trailer, put in a kitchen into the back of it, ran the first trip, and then ripped the kitchen out and said that's pointless, we're not having that. So it's very much a learn as we go kind of process. And now 9 trips later, we've got it down to a fine art of, again, using local businesses as well. So one of the things that we used quite a lot was the Thistly Cross in between Fort Augustus and Loch, and they were just awesome. Like they really were. We used them a few times for lunches, a few times for evening meals, just on a wet day, rather than making everyone sit underneath a tarp. You know, like I'd much rather just take them for a meal. You know?
It's a nicer experience then as well, and especially if you can build a good relationship.
Exactly. You know, so, and that's we've got about 6 different places now down the Great Glen. So at Foyer is one of the places that we camp on the last trip that we ran. I popped in, because we take chemical toilets with us, toilet tents in, and we could then dispose of them. So we'd use the caravanning club.
And to be fair, you know, when if it's your first experience and you're having to go to the toilet and you're in a wetsuit, there's nothing worse than stripping down.
No, totally. So we would then use the caravan and camping site just beside Foyers. To start off with, it was a little bit confrontational because we're obviously wild camping just across the little river from them. The lady behind the reception was like, "It's fantastic what you guys have done."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, sorry." She's like, "You're up to summit, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Normally that area that you're camping in is destroyed by the wild campers, and they come along, they're using the woods, so they don't bother digging holes. There's litter everywhere, but because you guys have been in there so much this year, they've left it alone and they've not come down it. And like the locals are over the moon of how clean it is, and you guys have left no mess. You've taken all the, you know, you're clearly emptying your toilets out. You know, you're being responsible about it." And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much." You know, like
it's nice to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was great, and then we had that relationship all the way up and down. So we had locals coming past, and they were chatting away to us and chatting to Fraser that runs the Great Glen trips, and so we're quite responsible in that way. That even though that we are wild camping and it's generally has a bit of stigma to it, whereas we're trying to be over and beyond responsible, you know.
Well, it's an opportunity to teach and to give more insight to the people on your tours, but also other people that you meet on what to do to be responsible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so then we ran 9 Great Glen trips this year. We've got 12 running for next year. This year we launched the loch trips. One of the things that we had with the Great Glen was we got lots of families asking us, could we do this with our children? And we turned them down because it was a mixed ability group. So we thought, well, we'll do a smaller trip for families. So we launched Loch trips. So again, that was brilliant. We sold them ones out in a couple of days. They went really quickly as well. So one of the immediate idea was to get in contact with the Ben Lawyers Hotel, who've got access down to the loch side. We now have a fairly private campsite, and we're right beside a pub. So again, we take people up for an evening meal. This year's Loch trips, they are switching over to what's called the Mystery Loch Tour next year. So this gives us a little bit more flexibility, whether it's Loch Rannoch, Loch Tay, Loch Earn, you know, and move around in that respect. I mean, the idea is, as always, is to paddle and journey, and I think that's one of the key things. That's what people seem to enjoy, is the journey aspect. It just gives it that adventurous feel.
That was my next question is, you know, this is a different way of travelling and sightseeing through Scotland and the northeast. So what are some of the feedback that you're getting from your clients? How are they experiencing these trips?
The feedback's been amazing. So we've very little in the way of negative feedback. We had one person who, I think it's expectations, isn't it? His expectations was to paddle the whole of the Great Glen. However, his group that he was with couldn't, and we have to go to the group rather than the individual.
Yeah. So
that was the only sort of negative feedback that we've had this year. The feedback generally has been phenomenal, well organised, instructors and staff, support team, lovely. I mean, our support team that we use, Callum's an ex-chef, fantastic in the kitchen. He's got a lot of experience. Fraser and Chris as well, the 2 guides that run the 2 trips. Just awesome people. The feedback's been fantastic, you know, and so many people. We had people coming from Dorset, Kent, Essex, Midlands, as well as people from Aberdeen and Dundee and local as well.
So besides your paddleboarding, I see you've got an image here on the wall as well of rock climbing. Are you planning any of those activities?
So rock climbing this year has been a bit of a flop, and same as the bushcraft. It's been really difficult in respect to social distancing, because we'd been closed down for the climbing side of things earlier in the year. By the time that we could start opening stuff up, we were already so fully booked for the paddleboarding. So it was only myself. So if I was stuck at Cataline for the day, I couldn't then release myself to then go and do a climbing lesson. I'm hoping now for 2022, we're taking on a few more people to come and work at the pond and to work up at Cataline. The idea is for me to step back more, and that should allow me a little bit more time to do bigger events. So we used to do a paddleboard picnic, and that would be starting a coastal tour, starting at Montrose and paddling to Johnshaven. And then we would stop off at St Cyrus, and there would be someone there ready to set up a picnic on the beach. And we'd get off the water, we'd set the boards up in a way, throw a blanket over the top of the boards and make a makeshift picnic table. Yeah. And then we'd have this beautiful, beautiful picnic set up by one of the local cafes in Montrose.
And it's a great location. St Cyrus is an amazing beach.
Lovely, but we've sadly, again, just because of how busy we are with our regular stuff, it hasn't allowed us the time to be able to go and do these other sort of events. So I'm hoping that 2022, if I can step back away from Catalan a little bit more and do a little bit more managing, I can then offer more climbing, paddleboard picnic, the sunset lessons as well. We're going to separate them slightly and have more of them on, and then bigger day events. And we're looking at doing some socials or potentially some kind of paddle and a pint sort of thing with one of the local bars in the area. So there's all these sort of things that I've got in the back of my head.
I just went from paddling a pint to beer crawl, and that just maybe not the best combination on a paddleboard.
If I could find pubs that were suitable enough, that were close enough together, I would definitely do a bar crawl.
So anyone who hasn't done paddleboarding, like myself, and is a little bit wary of it, what would you say to encourage them to come and try?
I'd say, getting a lesson is massively important. One of the key things that we try to do, and going back slightly to the affordability and adventure, is things need to be affordable for people to come and do them, and we charge £15 per person. And the reason that we do that is I've got 4 children. For me and my partner and our 4 kids to go and do an activity at £65 a head soon becomes really, really expensive. Yes. And so that's why I've always pitched things in an affordable manner. And not only will you enjoy the activity and have a great time, and our instructors are fantastic, but it's affordable enough to then come again. For paddleboarding, it's one of those things that don't be scared to try it. There's no stipulation to stand. We would much rather you came out, had a good time, kneeling down, learnt a new skill, learnt how to move the board, and then felt confident enough to come back a second time. But the only stipulation that we have is that you must smile for the pictures.
James, you've given us a really good introduction of everything that you do, and it sounds like you have some fantastic plans for the future, both short-term and long-term, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen with your activity centre. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the podcast, about outdoor adventures or what there is to see and do here in the Northeast?
For me, one of the big things that we try to do for the tourism side of things is the East Coast is up and coming, and traditionally people have gone to the West Coast. I think people are slowly coming to the realisation that although we don't have the dramatic scenery on the East, we do have a lot of pluses and a lot of bonuses to come into this side for the East Coast, for definite.
I would agree, yeah. And it's not as dramatic as the West Coast, but we still have some stunning scenery along the coast and some great opportunities to get close to wildlife and into nature. So that's definitely a reason to come, if nothing else.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for taking your time and spending the last half an hour or so with us and explaining more about paddleboarding and everything that you do. And I look forward to seeing what you do next, and I wish you a successful next season.
Thank you very much.